to talk about that at the end of the year, at the very end of the year, in fact, December 28th to be exact, there was a large omnibus spending bill passed on the Hill being Washington, D.C. In this omnibus spending bill were two, see, that's Abington Jefferson Hospital right there. Hi, Leslie. I unfortunately spent a lot of time there with my family, but I was born at Jefferson Hospital, and they're part of Jefferson. So, hi. So the omnibus spending bill was passed on the 28th. The 28th of December is significant because it gave a certain number of months to become compliant, and that certain number of months takes us to April 28th to become compliant. So first and foremost, let's understand that what we're talking about is sort of not a casual good idea, maybe you should, it is the new law. So in this omnibus spending bill, there were two pieces of legislation inserted. And what's important is that they're very different. They look at pregnancy and pumping through very different lenses. I promise we're not going to get too crazy boring here because it's sort of like a civics class. And I don't think that's why people showed up. I don't know. But the first thing you need to know is that they do go into effect on the 28th of April. It's not very far away. But what it does mean and what changed dramatically with this new pump law is that all workers, regardless of type of work, regardless of industry, and there's a Tori and I are still sort of like, you kidding me? There's two industries that aren't covered. One, it has to do with the railroads. They have 3 years to make a case why they still shouldn't, and airlines. So if you're a flight attendant or if you are a pilot, you do not have to follow these laws. Everybody else does. And what's important about that is it changes the number of women who are positively impacted, moves the number to like some super high number because there are no exceptions. It doesn't matter if you are working on an assembly room floor, if you're in the C-suite, it doesn't matter if you're in a cafeteria, it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, what part of the country, the geography matters not. Your hour, whether you're a wage worker or a salary worker, it doesn't matter. None of it matters. What matters now is this is absolutely the law, that you will be provided a private place that is, and this is the new song, it is not a bathroom, a private place that is not a bathroom, that provides you with electricity and privacy. So without any further ado, Ms. RN Tori Potter.
It's great to be here. Oh, there's my dog shaking behind me. It's great to be here and talking about this super important topic. And I know some of you probably are already getting questions from your clients. I know we are at the Breastfeeding Center getting questions about this. And I feel like it's our duty to provide our clients and our patients with the information that they need to empower them about their rights in the workplace. And so hopefully we will give you some new information today and give you a basic understanding, bless you, a basic understanding of these new laws and how they protect pumping women's rights in the workplace. So let's get started. Julia, you said that the Pump Act goes into effect when?
On April 28th, and we recognize that is not that far from now, which is a great thing. Just so you know that this is updated as we discussed. There was something that came into effect during the Obama administration. It was the Break Time for Nursing Mothers Act. It was limited, as we mentioned. So the big shift here is no more limitations. It is for everybody, regardless. That break time should be 20 minutes as sort of the standard. One thing that you and your clients need to be aware of is important, has to do with how far you have to go to begin pumping. So one of the big shifts is paying attention to, if you are in a 5-unit office campus and there is, oh, here comes somebody. You're in a 5-unit building and there's only 1 or 2 places to pump milk. That's really going to make a 20-minute break near impossible. So that's something that people will be paying more attention to. The space needs to be clean, it needs to be private. It needs to be a place to express milk. And that's for a year. Now, I understand that the guidelines say 2, and I don't think we should waste our time here debating, well, the law says 1 and 2 is recommended. We have made a lot of progress. I would like to, Tori, if it's okay with you, just focus on the progress, not the question of, was that enough? We can certainly circle back to it if anybody wants. So you've got the 1 year from the time that you come back. And again, can't say it enough, can't sing it enough, can't emote it enough. It cannot be a bathroom. It cannot be a place in a bathroom. It can't be curtained off in a bathroom. It just can't be a bathroom. I hope I've made that clear. It can't be a bathroom. So that's really one of the most important things, that you are provided a hygienic space with access also to a sink, a refrigerator. These things, again, are not big asks. And in fact, I'm not sure where that's coming from.
Helicopter.
A plane. Got it. Again, we're in DC. We get helicopters. And so it needs to be clean, close to a sink, close to, and with access to a refrigerator that maybe isn't like bursting over with lo mein. That would be a good idea too. But the base level of the law really has to do with the privacy, the electricity, and access. And hygiene.
So I know, a couple of the big differences between this new act and the previous one that was signed into law back in 2010 is the number of people that are covered and who is covered. So we're talking about like 9 million more people, I believe.
Isn't that amazing?
Amazing, because previously, right, it was salaried workers were not included. And so they were kind of exempt. So that's no longer the case. But let's talk about another big difference, and that is the ability for to have some legal recourse if your employer is not following these rules. And that's super important.
Right. It is super important because there is a very straightforward path to working to help your employer to get within the guidelines. And I say that with a smile on my face because really there is a very straightforward path to follow. It's in these documents that are right here. You are able to simply say you're not compliant, and they have to become compliant. If they do not become compliant, it is very easy to find recourse, and that can come in a couple different shapes and sizes. It can become a legal situation. The goal is, though, to make it so that compliance is something that people want to, employers want to be. They want to be compliant because it's going to be very easy for a woman to say, you're not compliant, this is not okay. Big difference, right? Before it was like, oh, we don't really want to talk about that. Now it's like, absolutely, tell us all about it. And that goes through different departments down here. So there's the Department of Labor, but there's also the fairness side of it also goes through another litigation channel. I won't bore you with all the acronyms of what's down here in DC. So Donna
I do see someone asked about the pay. Yeah, we were going to talk about that anyway, but go ahead. Why don't you explain how what's different about this, and are employers required to pay people for their pumping time, and under what circumstances?
And it really is a great question. And Donna, thank you for bringing it up. We were going to get there a little later, but it's straightforward. If you are doing work while you are pumping, if you're a teacher and you're grading papers, if you are reading a trade journal to figure out what the new innovations are within your industry, if you are on a phone call talking with somebody and you are pumping, that time is not break time. Straight up, not break time. That means you can't be charged for, and when I say charged, you can't have that time taken out because you were using it for pumping. This is very different than what it was. And to that end, I'm just going to add in one thing. It becomes really, I think, a positive. I'm sorry, not feeling all that well. It becomes very positive in terms of, okay, what could I do to make this work well for my organization from an employer point of view? But then also, as somebody who is a lactation consultant, it becomes very straightforward for you to support a woman saying, hey, if you added X, Y, and Z into this suite, I could be working every time I'm pumping. If that woman so chooses. Not everybody wants to, not everybody has to, but if you do, you can't be docked for that time.
Okay, so let's talk about employers and what options they have. Are there any exceptions? You mentioned the airline industry and the rail workers. Any other exceptions or situations where employers can opt out of this law?
There are ways to opt out of this law, but it's very hard to get from the raising a hand and saying, I'd like to be exempt and actually becoming exempt. Exempt means the onus is on the employer to prove that it is a hardship, which always sort of makes me chuckle. It's a hardship to provide a space for an employee to pump milk, but they do have to prove that. And by proving that, that means, I can't provide a space because we are out in the fields and we are picking corn in the fall. Well, you know what? That's nice, except for there are a lot of ways to provide some sort of a pumping situation. You have companies like Mamava who make portable units. You have companies like Nestle. There are enough ways to build a space that meets these requirements that, frankly, it will be more difficult than not to prove that hardship. And as far as the fine, Donna asked that. It's a great question. That is outlined because it's not a one-size-fits-all fine. That is definitely outlined. I would point yourself towards the Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor documents, and that's where you'll find it. I don't want to make it a one-size-fits-all because it's not. I don't want to be misleading. So to get out of it, you have to really prove something that is like hard to prove. And even more important, that 50, that's a federal number. States like New York and California have much lower numbers. California, I think it's 5 employees, 5 or more employees. You have to do this. New York State and New York City are also low, and there's a difference, but they're not 50. And so the idea is that, well, we'll get to this, but in short, the federal law is only something that you follow if it is less protective of women than a state or city law.
Right, and that's an important point because there, as you mentioned, may be states, California and New York in particular, whose laws are more protective than this federal law. And so
right.
Whatever offers the most protection, more protection, is the one that's to be followed. Is that correct?
Right. It is correct. So, I mean, if I say the word Texas, anybody can respond however they want. I think we can all think the same thoughts.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the different, different work environments, because we know not everyone works in an office or a hospital. So let's address some of those more unique situations. A police officer, a bus driver, things like that.
Right. So first of all, these are where the 2 laws begin to gel together, right? We had talked about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So I'm just going to touch on that here, Tori, and we can get into it further either in another session. We can do a bit here. Pregnant Women's Fairness Act looks at the idea of disabilities, and forget the word. It's just a word that's commonly used. Pregnancy as well as pumping milk are a disability. So if you have this disability, I know it's not, forgive me, everyone, but if you have this, if you are pumping milk and you cannot do it while you are driving a bus, for example, the law mandates that you need to be put in another position within the organization. Your employer may not be punitive in any way, shape, or form. In other words, you can't be put into the basement of the bus department. I don't even know what they do in the basement of the bus department, but you can't be put in isolation and a job that is where beneath your pay, your experience level. You are protected and because of and again, it's called a disability. So the answer to your question is you can't be fired, you can't be demoted, you can't lose wages, and that's the protection. If you go to the Department of Labor, they actually spell out some really specific jobs. I remember it because Julia is one of the people who they described. She cleans rooms at a hotel. And it talks about, how they can accommodate her. So they're not just saying, here, we're throwing this legislation at you. These are the rules. Bye-bye. The Department of Labor, Women's Bureau is really committed to helping organizations to find these answers. And why this is important for you, Tori, and everybody here from the world of lactation is that you now are able to say to your clients, be fearless. And I understand it's a very scary time to go back. You are not the same woman you were when you left. We all recognize that. We recognize there's so many variables that these women don't have a handle on yet. But because there's protection, it's a little bit easier. And we'll talk about this more in terms of peer support, which I know is one of really your big things. But it's a little bit easier to be a self-advocate and to use your voice because of what's protecting you.
Benefit pumping moms. And on that topic, I just want to read a couple of statistics because I think we're all familiar with how breastfeeding goes in this country sometimes. 13% of babies are exclusively breastfed at the end of 6 months. And so what that tells us is that people run into problems, and typically those problems start when they go back to work. And so I'm really hopeful that these new laws can help people continue to breastfeed and reach their goals without coming upon so many barriers in their workplace. And then another interesting one I found has to do with this sort of legal recourse and the previous law, which didn't account for that. So, you know, we said, oh, your employer has to do this, but then it was like, well, what if they don't? What do I do? And 60% of women have reported that their employers did not comply with the Break Time Act when it went into effect in 2010. 60%. So,
wow.
Yeah. So hopefully we as lactation consultants can get this information out to people so that when and if their employer does not comply with this new law, there's something they can do about it. And I think that's really important. And then similarly, one survey showed that half of moms felt that breastfeeding could impact their career growth. And 62% said there's a stigma attached to moms who breastfeed at work. And so hopefully this law starts to decrease that stigma, starts to empower people to just not be concerned that their trajectory in their career is not going to be impacted because they breastfeed. It's unfair for anyone to have to choose one or the other. So this law really gives people a lot more rights in the workplace as far as breastfeeding. And we should mention, as far as just real quick, as far as making that space, part of this law is that it doesn't have to be a permanent space. And that's an important thing to mention because perhaps there's only one pumping mom in the whole company and she's only going to need it for X amount of time. It doesn't have to be a room, but it has to be a private space that can be set up and closed off in a way. And then it can be taken down or changed into something else when she's done using it.
It can be, but back to the question of hospitals, I was up at Brigham and Women's in Boston, and I was having a conversation with a woman who actually gave up on her pumping, not because they didn't have a room, but because they kept moving it without telling people where it was. So you have to be able to communicate internally where the room is. I know that, again, these things seem so rudimentary, but it is important, even though they're not spelled out in the law, to, you know, help your clients go back and say, this sounds great. How will I know where the room is if it's not permanent? Basic questions. The idea of non-permanence, I think it's fantastic because it takes down a lot of objections if the real estate is expensive. That's why I was telling you about that.
Specific distance, or is it just sort of an undue hardship kind of vague thing?
It depends. The state laws are more about specific distance, and the national law is a little bit, it isn't specific, but if you go to the Labor Department, it says it should not be difficult to access from your primary place of work.
Okay.
So I don't know how you would describe that. It doesn't sound like undue hardship, but it also sounds like give us a break.
It should be pretty close. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Maureen asks a question as well. Oh, go. Yeah. Up above, about a new employee. Are there limitations? Can someone say you haven't been here 6 months, 3 months, whatever, we don't have to accommodate you? Does this go into effect immediately as soon as you're hired?
Immediately as soon as you're hired. And kudos to you if you're an employer who hired somebody who is pregnant. You are amazing. Thank you. So we can solve these problems together on sort of a macro level by looking at things like legislation and advocacy groups. But the lactation world is in such a unique position to support women as individuals. And those individuals then go and they help this is Tori's peer concept, which is brilliant. And I live by that. When you get there, you just pay it forward and keep paying it forward. And it's not meant to sound like something out of a musical that's silly. It's for real. And it's how we help ourselves to grow, both in opportunity, but also in strength. And so I'm really excited to see this go from lactation community to the next generation starting in April.